The wind whispered across the high walls of Winterfell, a gentle reminder of the North's constant presence. Within those gray stone battlements, young Bran Stark balanced his small hands on the windowsill of a tall, abandoned tower. He had climbed higher than anyone else would have dared, less from foolishness, more from curiosity and a longing for the taste of the crisp air that high places offered. Inside, shadows danced in the near darkness. Bran's breath fogged in front of him as he peered into the tower's cramped upper level. His eyes lingered on a flicker of movement behind the wooden door. There was a hushed whisper, a man's voice, and then a second voice, a woman's, sharp and urgent. Bran hovered in place, uncertain whether to turn around and return to the safety of lower ground. But something lured him onward. His heart pounding, he edged along the outer ledge with the same lithe skill he used for climbing the castle walls. He wanted a better vantage point. Down below, Winterfell's courtyard lay quiet, as the rest of his family was busy preparing to receive the royal party of King Robert Baratheon. But Bran wasn't paying any mind to the stirring in the courtyard. He was focused wholly on the murmuring from within the tower. He found a narrow window. Soft daylight leaked through, enough to illuminate shapes. Two figures standing close, gilded hair shining in the gloom, the woman's green eyes wide with alarm. Her voice snapped, "Someone's there," and she recoiled as though the looming shape at the window were a threat. Bran froze. He recognized them instantly from the yard earlier that day. Cersei Lannister, the Queen, and Jaime Lannister, her brother, the Kingslayer. They were pressed close, clearly in a moment of secrecy, but there was no confusion on Bran's part as to why they might be alone up here. Adult matters often befuddled him, but it was obvious that they did not want to be found together. "Easy," Jaime murmured, raising a hand in caution. His eyes fixed upon the boy's small face. His sister took a step back, her breath catching. Bran looked at them, wide-eyed, head spinning with the discovery that the Queen and her own brother stood here, locked in the kind of closeness that no brother and sister should share. That was knowledge enough to upend entire kingdoms, if repeated to the wrong ears. Even a 9-year-old boy could sense that much. Cersei's face looked carved out of porcelain, equal parts fear and anger, while Jaime's expression was that of a man who had been cornered but was determining how to slip free without bloodshed. Silence stretched taut between them. Bran was balanced precariously in the window frame, uncertain whether to scramble back down. His stomach clenched with the realization that if they wanted to hush him, they easily could. A rumor existed among the small folk. Jaime Lannister had once killed a king who trusted him. Would he silence a child to protect his own family's secret? Yet as that dreadful possibility hovered, Jaime's gaze flicked toward the open air behind Bran, the long drop to Winterfell's courtyard below. Bran could almost see the thought crossing the Kingslayer's mind. One push, one swift motion, and the boy and his knowledge would vanish into the cold wind, never to threaten the Lannisters again. The moment stretched on like a drawn bowstring, but something in Jaime's face changed. He frowned, looked at Cersei, then back at Bran. A flicker of conflict wrinkled his brow. "Boy," he said quietly, "how good are you at keeping secrets?" Bran couldn't speak. He clung to the edge of the window, chills prickling up his arms, uncertain if he should lie or run. Cersei hissed, "Jaime." Jaime held up a calming hand. "I haven't done anything," he said softly, though his voice was tight with tension. Then he turned to Bran again. "Listen closely. You saw something you shouldn't have. If you speak of it, your life may be forfeit as well as many others. If you remain silent—" He inhaled, as if trying to find an approach he'd never had to take before. Bran whispered hoarsely, "I won't tell." Cersei's eyes were cold. "You can't know that, Jaime," she said. "He's just a child. He might slip." "Not if we handle this carefully," Jaime answered, and his stare at Bran was intense. "You value your family. We value ours. Everyone wants safety, yes." Bran nodded. His head felt light as a snowflake. He dared not move an inch further onto the ledge, fearing he'd drop from fear alone. At length, Jaime exhaled, stepped forward, and extended a gloved hand toward the boy, as if offering him a chance to climb back inside instead of dangling precariously outside a tower window. Bran hesitated, uncertain if the hand was an extension of trust or a trap. But something in Jaime's gaze, a flicker of empathy, or perhaps guilt, steadied Bran's nerves. He slowly put his small, trembling hand in Jaime's. Jaime, strong and graceful, pulled Bran over the sill and set him gently onto the floor of the tower's upper chamber. Cersei watched with an unreadable expression, though clearly, the entire situation disturbed her. Bran stood before them, heart hammering in his chest. He could scarcely believe he was still alive, that the Kingslayer had not flung him into the open air. But the moment he stepped onto firm footing, Jaime released his arm and took a step back. "Go," the Queen hissed at Bran. "Just go." Bran gathered himself, blinking, uncertain if there was anything left to say. He took a final look at them, an image branded on his mind forever, then he hurried for the stairs. His feet thumped on each stone step as he fled, heart galloping until he finally reached the courtyard. He sank to his knees by the nearest wall, breathing hard. Whatever had happened in that tower would haunt him. But Jaime Lannister had not pushed him, nor had he ended Bran's life in that breathless moment of peril. Days passed. The king's arrival at Winterfell was the grandest spectacle Bran had ever witnessed. Trumpets sounded. The gold and black banners of House Baratheon fluttered. The king, broad and bearded, with an unmistakable presence, strode into Winterfell's gates as though he owned the entire realm, which of course he did. Queen Cersei arrived in a gilded litter, her twin brother Jaime riding behind her, clad in shining Kingsguard armor. Bran caught glimpses of them from afar, and each time he felt a spike of dread, as if he carried a hidden brand upon him. They didn't spare him a glance in public. Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell, dutifully welcomed his old friend. The king planned to name Ned as Hand of the King, bringing him south. Everything seemed as normal as fate might allow, except a strange tension lay behind the Lannisters' eyes. Bran saw it especially in Jaime, whose gaze often flicked about as though ensuring no eavesdroppers lurked. And Cersei, regal in her bearing, wore a mask of careful smiles and measured words. Whenever Bran was nearby with his siblings, he pretended he hadn't seen anything. Cersei and Jaime did the same. It was an unspoken truce built on fear. If anything, it was those unspoken edges that changed the course of fate. When the time came for the royal party to depart for King's Landing, Ned Stark agreed to become Hand but refused to take all his daughters or sons. Bran was to remain in Winterfell under Robb's supervision. The boy felt relief wash over him, for he feared the closeness of the Lannisters. Still, the king insisted that Ned bring Sansa and Arya so they might become ladies of the court. Sansa, with her auburn hair and fine manners, was delighted. Arya was less thrilled. In any case, the matter was decided. Ned, his daughters, and a small retinue would ride south with the king's retinue, which included the Lannisters. In the days leading up to the departure, a subtle tension rippled between Ned Stark and Queen Cersei. The Queen's polite words to Ned had an undercurrent of steel. Jaime offered the occasional jest, but his eyes gave nothing away. Tyrion Lannister, the imp, watched everything with curiosity. If he suspected something was amiss, he did not let on. At that stage, no one had a clue just how the boy from Winterfell was shaping the course of events, simply by still being able to walk and breathe. Then the southbound convoy took to the King's Road. Life in Winterfell returned to its quieter rhythms, though the hush felt more uneasy than comforting. Bran tried to bury the memory of the tower. Sometimes he scaled the walls again, hoping to recapture the carefree sensation climbing once gave him, but it never felt the same. Now, each time he reached a certain height, he imagined a gold-haired man's hand seizing him by the collar. Yet that had never come to pass. He was no cripple, no broken child in bed. He was merely haunted by a secret. Perhaps that was enough to change everything. Ned Stark had never much liked the Lannisters. Cersei seemed sly, while Jaime was a man whose vow-breaking overshadowed any small goodness. Tyrion was the only one who reminded Ned of a half-decent soul, at least in wit, if not always in moral clarity. But as the long cavalcade made its way south, Ned found himself in closer proximity to Jaime than ever before. Jaime was sworn to protect the king and by extension the hand of the king, though he wore that duty loosely, as if it were more a means to remain near the queen than a matter of principle. When they stopped at inns along the way, Ned would sometimes overhear Jaime jesting with the soldiers. He learned more about the famed warrior's comedic barbs, his skill with a sword, his unhidden scorn for certain matters. One evening, they found themselves sharing a table only because there was no other seat left in the cramped hall. Ned could have excused himself, but Robert Baratheon, in his boisterous mood, had insisted, "Sit, Ned, sit. You and Jaime should share some ale. You're both fine swordsmen, gods damn it. Bound to have something in common." Jaime's smirk at that was unreadable. He gave a slight inclination of his head to Ned, who took his seat. The air bristled between them. Ned was still uncertain how he felt about the man who had broken his oath to the Mad King, even if that act had saved countless lives. Word was word, a vow was a vow. But he could not forget the blood-stained throne with the Mad King's lifeless body at its foot. They drank in silence. Robert, in a mood to celebrate even in the middle of nowhere, soon turned his attention to other knights. That left Ned and Jaime alone at the far end of the table. Jaime's eyes flicked over Ned, as though sizing him up. At last, Jaime spoke with that casual, mocking lilt. "Well, Lord Stark," he said, "how does it feel to be on the road to your new home in King's Landing?" Ned offered a measured look. "It's far from home," he answered simply. "But a duty is a duty." "Your sense of duty is well known," Jaime remarked. He drank his ale, setting the cup down with a dull thud. "King Robert is lucky to have you." "I serve my king and the realm," Ned replied, noting the slight dryness in Jaime's tone. The man's voice always sounded a hair's breadth from scorn or jest. "Indeed." Jaime's attention flicked across the room to where Cersei was seated among her ladies. She caught his eye, and something unspoken passed between them. Then Jaime shrugged, turning back to Ned. "I'm told you're an honorable sort, a good father, a loyal husband." He let a moment pass, letting his words carry their own weight. "I don't suppose you and I will ever be good friends, but perhaps we can avoid any swords at each other's throats." Ned narrowed his gaze, suspecting a barb in Jaime's casual posture. "I have no quarrel with you, sir. Not unless you give me reason." Jaime offered a thin smile. "Well, that's good to know." The conversation stalled. But in that silence, Ned had the odd sense that there was more going on behind Jaime's green eyes. A certain tension, as though the Kingslayer was uneasy. Was it simply being around Ned, or was there some deeper guilt gnawing at him? Ned couldn't tell, and he had never been a man for subtle intrigue. He simply made a note to keep an eye on Jaime, uncertain why his sense of caution was rising. Something about the man's focus on the queen, something about the flickers of worry behind those handsome features, set Ned's instincts on edge. They continued south. Slowly, they drew near the crossroads inn. One evening, Jaime excused himself from the king's table and went out to the stable courtyard. It was a quiet, moonlit night. Ned stepped outside shortly after to clear his head from Robert's loud talk of war and old conquests. He didn't expect to see Jaime, but there the Lannister knight stood, leaning against a wooden post, arms crossed. Jaime glanced over as Ned approached, half hidden by shadows. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Jaime broke the silence. "Lord Stark, do you ever tire of hearing about Robert's glory days? His war stories, his hunts, his women?" Ned considered carefully before replying. "His stories are sometimes tiresome, but they are part of who he is." Jaime gave a short laugh. "He clings to the past. It gets heavier with each passing day, and yet he hoists it onto his shoulders over and over." Ned's posture stiffened. "He's the king," was all he said, as though that alone explained why they endured Robert's ways. "That he is," Jaime agreed softly. He looked up at the moonlight. "You have no love for my family, do you, Stark?" Ned hesitated. "I respect your father's power, but he has done much to put the realm under Lannister influence. I don't always believe that's best for the Seven Kingdoms. And you must hate me for the Mad King." Jaime's voice was strangely even. "You were there, weren't you, after it ended?" "I recall you arriving in the throne room." Ned's memory flashed with images of the Mad King's blood on the stone. Jaime in his white cloak perched on the Iron Throne. "Yes," Ned said quietly. "I was there." They both stood in that moment. Each had lived a lifetime since, but the memories lingered like ghosts. Finally, Jaime exhaled. "You think me without honor," he said, something bitter in his voice. "Perhaps I deserve that, but if I hadn't done it, the city would have burned, and tens of thousands more would have died." Ned nodded, not in agreement but in acknowledgement of what Jaime had said. "I never said it was the wrong choice," he answered. "I said it was a broken vow." They stared at one another, the Northman and the Kingslayer, as the wind whispered through the courtyard. A fragile understanding seemed to form, built of respect for each other's convictions, if not for the same code. Then Jaime shifted, as though preparing to leave. "I doubt we'll ever see eye to eye, but perhaps we can at least see each other's point," he said, turning. Ned found himself saying, "Perhaps," before he could stop himself. Then Jaime walked off, and the Northman remained alone, staring at the moonlit ground. At King's Landing, the city gates yawned open for them. The capital stretched out with teeming crowds, twisting streets, and the Red Keep perched like a blood-red fortress upon its hill. Robert led the way in, welcomed by throngs of cheering subjects, though how many cheered out of love versus fear was anyone's guess. Ned and his daughters followed, marveling. Sansa's eyes glowed with excitement, while Arya looked both curious and wary. Cersei was carried in her litter, glimpses of her cool, regal face visible behind the curtains. Jaime and the rest of the Kingsguard accompanied them on horseback, shining in the brilliant southern sun. Within days, Ned was sworn in as Hand of the King. He took up residence in the Tower of the Hand, beginning the tedious work of learning the royal finances, attending council meetings, and trying to keep Robert from draining the coffers on feasts and tournaments. It became clear quickly that the crown was deeply in debt, to the Lannisters most of all. That gave House Lannister a stranglehold on the throne. Ned's suspicions about the Lannisters' grip on power became sharper by the day. Yet, interestingly, Jaime didn't attend many of those council sessions. He had no seat there. Instead, Ned encountered Littlefinger, Lord Peter Baelish, who served as Master of Coin, Varys the Spider, Grand Maester Pycelle, and Renly Baratheon, the king's younger brother. Each man had his own agendas. Ned found it exhausting, but he pressed on, determined to do his duty. Littlefinger was obsequious, with a cunning grin and soft footfalls. He insisted on offering Ned tours of the city's finances, the treasury, the state of tax collection, all manner of coin matters. In those earliest days, Ned believed Littlefinger to be irritating but perhaps harmless enough. Peter always had something witty to say, a sly comment about how easily misfortune could befall an honest man in King's Landing. Ned tried to brush off the warnings. After all, Ned had grown up on stories of old-fashioned honor. He believed that if he was straightforward and righteous, he could avoid the worst of the capital's serpentine traps. Jaime's role remained as the king's sworn protector. In truth, Robert was rarely in danger within the Red Keep. The real threats lurked behind closed doors, in the council chambers, or in the secret whispers of ambitious lords. Jaime's days were spent either sparring with the other Kingsguard, escorting the king on hunts or to his boisterous revels in the city's less savory establishments, or quietly prowling the castle corridors as though searching for something intangible. One morning, Ned rose early, unable to sleep. He decided to take a walk through the Red Keep's courtyard to clear his head before the day's council session. Near the training yard, he heard the clack of wooden swords striking. Poking his head in, he saw Jaime sparring with a pair of younger knights, golden hair flashing as he pivoted with lethal grace. He knocked the first knight's sword aside, sidestepped a second thrust, then smacked the second knight on the side of the helmet with a quick blow that would have broken bone had it been steel. The watchers let out impressed whistles. Even Ned, no great admirer of Jaime, couldn't deny that the man was a warrior born. Eventually, Jaime noticed Ned's presence. He waved off the knights, who backed away panting. Jaime pulled off his helmet and let the sweat drip down his brow. "Lord Stark," he greeted, the echoes of the fight still thrumming through his breath. "Sir Jaime," Ned replied. He stepped forward, acknowledging the watchers with a nod. Some parted to let the hand of the king pass. Ned glanced at the practice swords. "Would you care for a fresh partner?" Jaime raised an eyebrow. "You wish to spar with me, Lord Stark?" His lips curved in a faint grin. "Is that wise?" Ned shrugged, unoffended. "I think it might do us both some good." A hush fell over the yard. The men parted eagerly, giving them space, clearly excited to watch this impromptu match. Jaime grinned more openly now. He offered Ned a wooden sword. Ned tested its weight, adjusting his stance. He wasn't young, but he was hardly decrepit. He'd learned his share of sword work from the masters-at-arms in Winterfell and had fought in Robert's Rebellion. Jaime Lannister was widely considered one of the best swords in the realm, second perhaps only to Barristan Selmy. It would be a challenge, but Ned had never shied away from a fair fight. They circled each other, the morning sun slanting down. Jaime feinted first, a subtle flick of the wrist, forcing Ned to block with a quick shift. Ned answered with a thrust. Jaime sidestepped, his footwork impeccable. The watchers were silent, enthralled. One of them might have been whispering bets under his breath. The wooden swords cracked loudly as they met, each man testing the other's reflexes. Jaime was fluid with cat-like grace, while Ned was methodical but strong, each strike measured. At one point, Jaime advanced with a rapid series of cuts. Ned parried thrice, sidestepped the fourth blow, and managed a riposte that forced Jaime to shift away. The watchers murmured their surprise, impressed that Ned had held his own so far. Jaime tried another angle, and Ned barely deflected, feeling the jolt in his arms. Their eyes locked, each evaluating the other's next move. Then Ned saw an opening. He lunged for Jaime's offhand side, aiming a direct thrust. But Jaime pivoted with unnatural speed, bringing his sword up to clash against Ned's. The momentum forced Ned's sword out wide, and in a blur, Jaime twisted around and lightly tapped Ned's back with the wooden blade, right where a finishing stroke might have fallen. Collective gasp. Jaime lowered the practiced sword and stepped back, breathing a little hard. Ned inhaled, acknowledging that he'd been bested in that moment. But the watchers saw no humiliation. Ned had performed admirably against the Kingslayer's skill. Jaime extended a hand, and Ned clasped it. Their eyes met, and there was a strange respect there, one that had not been present before. The watchers broke into scattered applause. Afterward, Ned turned away, letting Jaime soak in his victory, but for the first time, there was a sense of camaraderie, a handshake in the yard that carried more meaning than words. In the days that followed, word of their spar would spread quietly, and each time people told of it, they said how the hand of the king and the Kingslayer had parted with a handshake rather than cold silence. Amid the swirl of politics, Ned found himself occasionally drawn into conversation with Jaime, sometimes in the courtyard, other times at feasts or passing each other in the corridors. It was never anything deep, but each exchange seemed marginally warmer. Perhaps friendship was too strong a word, but at least they had established an understanding. Jaime even teased Ned once about the North's frigid winters, jesting that a man from Casterly Rock could never survive so far north without turning into an icicle. Ned responded that southern nights would be too soft to wield their swords once the wind chilled them to the marrow. Their banter raised eyebrows among courtiers, unaccustomed to seeing Ned Stark share a light-hearted quip. Cersei watched them from a distance, her gaze calculating. Littlefinger observed everything with his mocking little smiles, as though collecting tidbits of information to be used at some future juncture. Tyrion Lannister, newly arrived from some journey of his own, found it all most curious. The imp cornered Jaime one afternoon and said, My brother, you seem to be getting along with Ned Stark these days. Careful, or you might sprout a sense of honor." Jaime half snorted. He's not as dull as I assumed, or at least not entirely. I suspect he sees the world in black and white, but that's more than I can say for most folks around here who see only gold." Tyrion chuckled. "Yes, gold does have a way of enchanting people. Father would be most distressed if you and Stark were to become actual allies. I wonder how that would change the shape of our dear sister's manipulations." Jaime shot Tyrion a quick glance. "I'm no ally of Ned Stark, but we've found some common ground." "Such as?" Jaime hesitated, his jaw clenching. His mind flashed to the tower in Winterfell, to the boy who had discovered him in an unholy act with his sister. The guilt he felt, the relief that he had not committed the crime that would have stained his soul further. He wondered if Ned sensed something amiss. "Just that war is coming. Perhaps not tomorrow, but soon," he said finally. "And I'd rather have the hand of the king as something other than an enemy when that storm breaks." Tyrion arched an eyebrow. "You think war is coming?" Jaime stared at the red keep's distant spires. "Yes, whether it be from the Targaryen girl across the sea or some other corner. The realm is too uneasy." Tyrion sipped his wine. "Well, let's hope that if it comes, we pick the right side." Over the next weeks, Ned uncovered clues suggesting that Jon Arryn, the previous hand, had been investigating something about the royal children's parentage. This brought him into contact with Littlefinger more often, as Peter offered leads and cryptic hints. In the original timeline, it might have been Bran's fall and subsequent coma that spurred events, focusing Ned's suspicions on the Lannisters. But in this changed scenario, there was no grievous injury to a Stark boy to cast immediate suspicion on the Lannisters. Instead, Ned's investigation proceeded more slowly, driven primarily by the leftover puzzle of Jon Arryn's final days. He began speaking to armorers, visiting old records in the keep's libraries, and noticing the traits of the Baratheon line. The hair color, the features. He began to suspect that Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen might not be Robert's trueborn children. But he had less direct proof. Without Bran's injury and Catelyn's capturing Tyrion at the crossroads, which never happened in this altered timeline, the pieces fell into place differently. Tyrion was not taken prisoner, meaning Tywin Lannister had no direct cause to gather armies on the march. The tension between Stark and Lannister simmered at a lower heat. Yet Littlefinger's machinations were not idle. He found other ways to stir conflict. He noticed that Ned and Jaime were developing a curious rapport, if not close friendship, then at least a sense of mutual respect. That was dangerous for a schemer like Littlefinger, who preferred that the Starks and Lannisters remain at each other's throats. Two great houses forging a bond of any kind could threaten his personal ambitions. Peter Baelish needed to sow distrust before it flowered into any more genuine friendship. His first seeds were subtle. Whispers in Ned's ear, "Be careful with Ser Jaime. He's always near the queen." You can guess why. Hints dropped in Jaime's ear. "Lord Stark grows suspicious of your sister's children, you know? He might soon decide you're part of the same deception." Both men, private by nature, mostly brushed aside such rumors, but they planted small seeds of wariness. Cersei grew restless as well. The longer she remained in the capital, the more she noticed Ned Stark's infiltration of her family's affairs. She questioned Jaime in private, sometimes in clipped, urgent tones. "You're spending too much time near him. What are you doing?" Jaime usually tried to soothe her. "Calm, dear sister. If we have him on good terms, he might be easier to blind when the time comes." But part of him was unsure. The tower in Winterfell still weighed on him. Sometimes he dreamt of it. In the dream, he always did push Bran, and the boy's scream echoed. He woke with cold sweat. He told himself he had spared the child out of some sense of decency or guilt. Perhaps it was the first step on a path he never expected to walk. Ned, for his part, found that, ironically, Jaime was often more straightforward than the other denizens of the court. Varys and Littlefinger cloaked every word in meaning. Renly had his agendas. Pycelle carried the weight of the Lannisters in the council. But Jaime didn't meddle in the council. He was a Kingsguard sworn to protect, not to scheme. Some nights, after the official business concluded, Ned and Jaime even found themselves in the courtyard again. exchanging a few half-serious practice blows or discussing the king's latest foolish venture. Over time, strange as it seemed, a friendship or something resembling it began to form. Jaime, aware that the best liars told half-truths, let slip small admissions. That the court was rotten, that the king was no longer the man he'd admired in his youth, that Cersei's ambitions would lead the realm to dark corners. Ned found himself confiding some thoughts as well, albeit in clipped northern fashion. That the realm was poorly managed, that he worried about what lay beyond the wall, that he had nightmares about the Targaryen horrors of old returning. They argued frequently over the definition of honor, over the cost of war, over the nature of power. But with each argument the tension eased. Even Sansa noticed that whenever Ser Jaime passed her father in the halls, they exchanged a polite nod. That was more than many men offered Ned Stark. Arya, for her part, called Jaime the Golden Man, with some mixture of awe and wariness. Across the city, Littlefinger watched this development with narrowed eyes. The Lannisters, if united, were dangerous. But if the Golden Lion grew too comfortable with Ned Stark, it might spoil some of Peter's carefully nurtured chaos. He had planned for the moment when the Lannisters turned on the Starks or vice versa, fueling a war that would let him scoop up power in the confusion. But with Bran never having been attacked, Catelyn Stark never took Tyrion prisoner, which had been a linchpin in Peter's original manipulations. So Peter sought new ways to create friction, turning what was becoming a fragile bond between Jaime and Ned into something volatile. He stirred rumors about Jaime among Ned's retinue, that the Kingslayer boasted about betting more than the Queen, that Jaime was planning some deception. He whispered to Jaime that Ned was investigating the parentage of the royal children more deeply than ever, that Ned would come for Jaime once he had enough proof. And all the while, he kept Cersei's paranoia stoked, so that she would lash out at the slightest hint of a threat. Peter wanted the Lannisters turning their claws inward, while also setting them against the Starks when the time was ripe. It started to work, if only in small ways at first. Ned noticed that Jaime grew more distant after certain council sessions. Sometimes, Jaime made remarks about not trusting honorable fools. Meanwhile, Ned heard from one of his household guard that Ser Jaime had referred to him as a Northman too blind to see the lion prowling behind him. Ned tried to brush off these remarks, suspecting that rumor-mongers were twisting words. But the seeds were planted. They gnawed at him, making him question if Jaime was only feigning their amity to keep an eye on him. Robert Baratheon remained oblivious, more interested in his hunts and drink. Once, he took Jaime, Ned, and a retinue out into the Kingswood for a grand hunt. The king boasted that he'd spear the biggest boar that had ever roamed. Jaime and Ned ended up quietly trailing behind, occasionally exchanging lines about how best to track game. The conversation was subdued, each a bit uncertain due to the swirl of rumors in the keep. But there was still that kernel of genuine respect, a sense that had events been different, they might have been true friends long ago. The boar hunt ended in typical fashion, with Robert dangerously drunk and the kill delivered more through the skill of his men than the king's own spear. But it reminded Ned that Robert was a gambler with his own life, unafraid of the boar's tusks or the wine's illusions. Jaime seemed unimpressed by the display. He even rolled his eyes behind Robert's back at one point, which Ned caught, and couldn't help but grin at how childishly exasperated the Kingslayer looked. The moment made Ned realize how strange it was to share a private smile with this man he had once despised. Yet the capital's intrigues did not slow. The question of the royal heir's legitimacy loomed. Ned suspected that the children were Jaime's, not Robert's. He had read the genealogies, visited the blacksmith's apprentice Gendry, a boy with Robert's features, so reminiscent of the Baratheon line, a clue that screamed to be followed. The deeper Ned dug, the surer he became. But how to prove it? And if he did prove it, how would he proceed? The honorable path demanded that he tell Robert the truth. But that truth could spark war and topple the queen, possibly leading to the execution of the children, who were innocents in all this. He was torn, and ironically, he found it hardest to imagine dooming Jaime by revealing the secret. He recognized that Jaime's entire life might unravel if the fatherhood of those children came to light. Was Ned truly prepared to cause that level of bloodshed? Honor demanded truth, But was it honorable to cause a realm-wide war? He wrestled with these questions nightly. Jaime, meanwhile, found himself in whispered conversations with Cersei. She demanded to know if Ned was onto them. Jaime couldn't lie to her. He might be, Jaime admitted softly. I can see the tension in his eyes. He's discovered something, or at least he suspects. We must tread carefully. Cersei's face grew cold with fury. If he tries to move against us, we must strike first. Jaime frowned. He's not that kind of man. He'll do it by the book. He'll go to Robert or try to. Maybe we can get to Robert first. If we can spin the truth somehow, and put everything in danger. Cersei hissed. Our children, Jaime? Jaime rubbed his temple. Yes, our children. It was a secret so vile that no realm could easily forgive it. Brother and sister having children together. Jaime felt corners of his heart tearing. Was this the life he wanted? Once, he had told himself that he would do anything for Cersei. Now doubt gnawed at the edges. That tower in Winterfell had been a pivot point for him. Part of him still believed that if he'd done the ruthless thing, pushed that boy out the window, the truth would remain hidden forever. Another part was glad he had not become that monster. But secrets had ways of creeping out. Cersei demanded he do something. You have to keep him close, she said, eyes flashing. We need to know what he knows. You claim to have formed some sort of camaraderie. Make use of it, Jaime. Squeeze the knowledge out of him, or sow confusion so that he never gets the proof he needs. Her nails dug into Jaime's wrist. I will not let him destroy us. Jaime forced a nod. I'll handle it. In the following days, Jaime tried to talk more directly with Ned. One evening, after a council session, he stopped Ned in a deserted corridor lit by flickering torches. Jaime leaned against the stone wall, arms crossed. Lord Stark, he said, might I have a word? Ned paused, dismissing his men so they could speak in private. Yes, Sir Jaime? He said, noticing the seriousness in Jaime's face. Jaime hesitated. I hear things, you know. The Red Keep is full of whispers. If you're investigating certain matters, I'd urge caution. Some truths are best left buried. Ned's jaw clenched slightly. I don't bury truth. A flash of frustration crossed Jaime's face. Then you risk burning down everything. He exhaled. There are some lines that, once crossed, can never be undone. You should consider that the realm might not be ready to handle what you want to reveal. Ned stared at Jaime, measuring him. Are you threatening me? Jaime locked eyes with him, and for a moment, it seemed like the corridor shrank, the tension so thick that neither man could breathe. Then Jaime spoke quietly. No, I'm asking you to think carefully. If you step onto that path, you can't step off again. And many good people might suffer for it. Ned was silent. He recalled how Robert had once hammered the Targaryens into the ground because of what Rhaegar did to Lyanna. If Robert were told that his own children were not truly his, that his wife had been unfaithful with her brother, would he become a second Mad King, consumed by rage? He might kill the children, or the realm might fracture into civil war. Stark against Lannister, Baratheon against Lannister. Ned could almost see blood in the streets, the swirling chaos. Jaime's voice was softer now. I'm not telling you to do anything dishonorable, but weigh the cost. Is it worth it? Ned's answer came hoarsely. I don't know. That hesitation told Jaime everything. The Kingslayer let out a breath, relieved that Ned wasn't charging forward blindly. Then let us see how things develop, Jaime said. For what it's worth, I don't want a war. Not anymore. He said that last part under his breath, almost to himself, as though remembering a time when all he cared about was glory. He gave Ned a small nod and walked away, leaving the Northman staring after him in the half-dark corridor. Elsewhere in the keep, Littlefinger was weaving new webs. He sensed that Ned was on the cusp of discovering the full truth. Peter's carefully orchestrated chaos required that discovery to come at the wrong time, or in the wrong way, or with the wrong people poised to exploit it. He nudged the pieces on his mental board. He arranged for certain guards to overhear certain remarks. He quietly met with a few lesser Lannister cousins, hinting that Ned Stark had the king's ear and that it would soon spell doom for them if they didn't act. He coaxed lords who bore grudges against Tywin Lannister to sharpen their knives in anticipation. He even dropped by the Tower of the Hand unannounced one day, hoping to catch Ned alone. He found Ned in his solar, surrounded by ledgers and old genealogical records. Ned looked up warily. "Lord Baelish." Littlefinger smiled. "My Lord Hand, you look invested in your research." He took a seat without being asked. "Might I be of assistance in any way?" Ned frowned. "I doubt it." With an exaggerated sigh, Peter said, "Ah, if only I had your trust. I do so wish to help keep the peace. The city thrives on peace after all. But I sense you believe some dire threat lingers." Ned's face was unreadable. "I have heard that you're a man of many talents, Lord Baelish. Not all of them conducive to peace." Littlefinger placed a hand on his chest, feigning wounded pride. "You cut me deeply. My only motive is to serve the realm." He eyed the genealogical scrolls. "And perhaps help you serve it as well by, confirming certain suspicions you have about certain people in high places?" Ned's eyes narrowed. "Why would you help me?" Peter leaned forward. "Because I fear that a direct confrontation with those people in high places might tear the realm apart. If you'll permit me to help you handle this with the subtlety it demands, we might avoid a tragedy." He lowered his voice conspiratorially. "Honor is a fine thing, my lord, but in King's Landing, a pure heart can be a blade pointed at your own throat. Let me help you, discreetly, so that when you learn the final piece of this puzzle, you aren't alone in the dark." Ned studied the sly curve of Peter's lips, the gleam in his eyes. He didn't trust a word from that mouth. Yet there was logic in the notion that if he confronted the queen openly, chaos might follow. Littlefinger offered a labyrinthine approach, full of half-truths, but perhaps it could avoid immediate bloodshed. Ned had sworn to Robert that he would protect the realm. If that meant navigating a more treacherous path, so be it. So he nodded curtly, letting Littlefinger think he had found an ally. That same day, Peter found Jaime in a quiet corner of the castle. Jaime was leaning on a window ledge, looking over the city. Littlefinger put on his most charming smile. "Sir Jaime," he greeted. "I thought I might find you here." Jaime's eyes flicked to him, unimpressed. "Lord Baelish, what do you want?" Peter placed his hands behind his back. "To offer a small piece of counsel. I know your dear sister is anxious about the Hand's investigations." Jaime's jaw tightened. "What of it?" "I'm here to say that I am friendly to the cause of House Lannister. If you or the Queen wish to guide Lord Stark's inquiries in a way that does not damage the crown, I can be of service." He paused, letting the tension settle. It would be a pity if Stark learned more than he should. All that chaos, so many innocents in danger. Jaime studied Littlefinger with open distaste. "And what would you gain out of such friendly assistance?" Littlefinger shrugged airily. "A stable city is good for business. I like my business. Also, I expect some modest appreciation for my discreet help. After all, I only want what's best for the realm, and House Lannister is the realm's most generous benefactor." He tapped a finger on the windowsill. "Think it over." Jaime said nothing more, and Peter left with a smug look. Once gone, Jaime found himself wanting to hurl something at the man's back. Baelish was too cunning, too eager to insinuate himself into every corner. So many illusions and plots. Jaime's mind churned. He felt as though the entire Red Keep was a nest of snakes, and the only person who seemed half-straight was Ned Stark. Ironically, a man he once disdained. That night, Jaime roamed the halls, unable to sleep. He found his feet carrying him to the Tower of the Hand. The guards let him pass after a brief question. He asked for Lord Stark. One of Ned's guards fetched Ned, who emerged from his solar, looking tired and a bit perplexed. Jaime waved the guard off and said quietly, "We should talk." Ned studied Jaime's face by torchlight. The lines of tension were unmistakable. "Come inside," Ned said. They entered the solar, door latching behind them. A single candle flickered, casting shadows across the table of scrolls. Ned stood behind his chair, arms folded. Jaime paced like a caged lion, trying to find the right words. Finally, Jaime turned to Ned and said in a low voice, "Littlefinger approached me tonight. He claims to want to help the Lannisters keep you from learning, whatever it is you're digging for." Ned's eyes narrowed. "You know what I'm digging for, Jaime?" A flick of Jaime's gaze. "Yes, and so does my sister. But that's not the point. The point is that Baelish wants to play both sides. He told me one story. I'm sure he told you another. He's a weasel. He thrives on strife." Ned let out a grim chuckle. "You surprise me, Sir Jaime. Normally, men in your position would embrace a weasel like Baelish if it helped them keep a secret." Jaime's expression soured. "Maybe I would have once upon a time." He rubbed his face. "But I can't do this dance. My sister, our children, this entire situation is becoming too large to contain with deception. And Baelish is more dangerous than a troop of sellswords. If he can pit Lannister against Stark, he wins. I suspect that's his game." Ned nodded. "I've suspected the same. But you must realize that if the truth about the royal children is proven, war could erupt. And if it's kept hidden, we're living a lie that undermines the entire realm." Jaime grimaced, anguish flickering across his features for a moment. "I know, there's no easy answer. But I wanted you to be aware that Baelish is stoking the fires, trying to ensure that if you move against us, or if we move against you, he'll benefit." Ned stared at the Kingslayer, deeply aware of the risk Jaime was taking by coming here. "Why tell me this? Are you trying to protect your sister? Or the children?" Jaime's hands balled into fists. "I'm trying to prevent a slaughter," he said quietly. "I swore an oath to protect the king, but Robert, he's not the man you think. If he finds out that Joffrey is not truly his son, I fear he'll kill them all. He'll kill my sister, the children, anyone he suspects. I can't let that happen." Ned's heart clenched. He thought of Sansa, who was betrothed to Joffrey. He thought of the other children, Myrcella and Tommen, their bright eyes. They were innocent. Robert would want them all dead, he admitted heavily. Or at least that's what he once told me about Targaryen children. Jaime's posture sagged. "I don't know what to do." A long silence held them. Then Ned said, "If you want to avoid Baelish's manipulations, you and I must speak plainly. No more half measures. I suspect Joffrey is your son, and Myrcella and Tommen as well. Robert has no idea. You and Cersei. This is an abomination, but the children aren't at fault. What would you do if I confronted the king?" Jaime swallowed hard, the candlelight dancing in his green eyes. "I would try to stop you, because I have no choice." Ned nodded. "I understand. But," Jaime added, "I don't want to kill you. Strange, isn't it?" Ned managed a ghost of a smile. "Yes, it is." Quiet filled the solar for a long moment. At length, Ned spoke again. "I can't keep this secret forever. Honor demands the truth. But if revealing it dooms the children, is that honorable? Is letting them live a lie any better?" He felt a desperation that he had never experienced before, as if torn between duty to the realm and the reality of innocence being slaughtered. It was reminiscent of how he had felt when they found the Targaryen infants in the Red Keep, killed by the mountain. That memory weighed heavily on him. Jaime bowed his head. "I'm sorry, Stark. I never wanted this. Believe that or not." He looked up. "If you can find a way to preserve their lives, I'd take it. But Cersei won't go meekly, and Robert's wrath." "Yes," Ned said softly. He looked at the window, the faint lights of King's Landing streets below. "We have to outmaneuver Littlefinger. He wants a war. We must keep the realm from turning into a battlefield. If we can find a way to remove the children from Robert's wrath, perhaps." A single knock on the door made them both jump. Jaime's hand flew to the hilt of his sword. Ned's guard called from outside. "My lord, is everything all right?" Ned responded at once. "Yes, you may go." He locked eyes with Jaime. "We can't be seen together like this. It will raise more suspicion. Jaime nodded. Then I'll leave. But keep your eyes open, Stark. Baelish is the real enemy here. If we don't stop him, he'll tear us apart. Ned nodded in agreement and Jaime slipped out. Alone, Ned sat in the flickering candlelight for a long time, unseeing, thoughts swirling with the gravity of the problem. War or secrecy, truth or the children's safety. He only knew one thing with certainty. He would not let Peter Baelish use them all like chess pieces on a board. In the following days, events escalated. Littlefinger quietly fed Robert's courtiers hints that Ned was investigating the parentage of the royal children. At the same time, he spread rumors in the street that King Robert was incompetent and might be replaced by a strong champion of the people. Someone like Jaime or Tywin. The city's tension rose. People whispered of plots and coups. Robert noticed the sense of unease and demanded a grand tournament to distract the small folk. Ned argued that the treasury couldn't afford it, but Robert waved him off. We'll pay it back eventually. The people need bread and circuses. The king declared with a jovial grin. The hands tournament was announced. Knights arrived from all over the realm. The city thrummed with excitement. Ned suspected that the tournament would be a perfect breeding ground for intrigue. And he was right. Jaime entered the lists, hoping to win glory for House Lannister. The hound, Sandor Clegane, was forced into it by King Robert. Many others joined. Ned was too busy investigating to do more than watch from the stands. On the first day of jousting, the crowds roared. Sansa cheered with naive delight for the gallant knights. Arya sulked, unimpressed by the spectacle. Ned kept scanning the stands for any sign of trouble. Robert drank and bellowed, enjoying the sport. Jaime unhorsed several challengers in quick succession, while men wearing house sigils from all corners tested their lances. Littlefinger drifted by, offering commentary with his characteristic smirk. Varys lurked near the king, eyes darting. In the final tilt of the day, Jaime faced off against a burly knight from the Reach. The two thundered down the lists, lances colliding in a splinter of wood. Jaime kept his seat. The other knight tumbled from his horse. Cheers erupted. Jaime lifted his visor, golden hair shining in the sunlight. He swept a mocking bow to the crowd. Ned watched the performance, unable to deny the skill and presence of the Kingslayer. But he also caught a glimpse of Jaime's eyes flicking up to where Ned sat. There was no arrogance there, only a guarded acknowledgement. That evening, as crowds dispersed and the sun set red over the city, Robert convened a feast in the throne room. Laughter and music filled the halls. Tables groaned with roast meats and honeyed desserts. Servants scurried to fill cups. Ned stood near the dais, sipping watered wine, content to keep a clear head. Robert sat at the high table, guffawing with some lords from the Westerlands. Cersei was nowhere to be seen, perhaps disinclined to watch her drunken husband brag about old battles. Jaime was also absent, probably removing his armor or nursing bruises. So Ned watched alone, feeling uneasy. This had all the markings of a calm before a storm. Then Littlefinger appeared at his elbow, seemingly from nowhere. "My Lord Hand," Peter said lightly. "Not enjoying the festivities?" Ned's face tightened. "I have other matters on my mind." "Ah, yes, your research," Littlefinger replied. He tapped his cheek thoughtfully. "Surely you have enough evidence by now to do something. Or is it not as straightforward as you believed?" Ned kept his face unreadable. "Stay out of my affairs, Lord Baelish. I've warned you before." Littlefinger smirked. "I'm only trying to help, dear Ned." He lowered his voice. "And if you won't let me help you, perhaps the Lannisters will." He laughed softly at Ned's glare. "Oh, don't worry. I haven't told them anything important, yet." "Enough," Ned growled, stepping away before he lost his temper. He paced the edges of the feast hall, mind whirling. He needed to act soon or everything would explode. But how? He considered confronting Robert privately. But Robert was never sober these days. It would be a disaster, especially with Littlefinger weaving new rumors. Ned thought about talking to Jaime again, trying to find a compromise that might protect the children. Was that even possible? Sins aside, the children were still innocents. He was so consumed by thought that he barely registered the hush falling over the hall. People turned to look at the dais. Cersei stood there, accompanied by 2 Lannister guards. The queen's face was set like marble. Robert, drunk and flushed, looked bewildered by her sudden entrance. Jaime was behind her, his expression grim. "Robert," Cersei called, her voice echoing. "We must talk." At once, the jovial atmosphere curdled. Robert squinted. "Talk? Now? I'm in the middle of a feast." Cersei swept her gaze over the assembled lords and ladies. "Yes," she said coldly. "Now." Her hands shook slightly, but her voice was firm. "I believe our dear Lord Hand has discovered something. Something that, if spoken aloud, might tear this realm apart." A ripple of confusion and alarm spread through the crowd. Ned froze. So she was forcing the issue into public? Robert scowled. "What in the 7 hells are you talking about, woman?" Jaime stepped up, putting a hand gently on Cersei's arm as though to steady her. He looked at Ned across the throne room, a silent plea in his eyes to do something. Cersei pressed on, ignoring Jaime's attempts to calm her. "The parentage of our children has been called into question," she said, voice taut as a bowstring. Gasps erupted. Whispers filled the air. Littlefinger's lips curved in a delighted smile from the shadows. He was seeing the seeds of chaos bloom. "What is this madness?" Robert roared, half rising from his seat. "What is she talking about, Ned?" Ned's heart pounded. He cursed under his breath. This was exactly the kind of confrontation he hadn't wanted. The Queen was forcing everyone's hand in the worst possible arena, in front of the entire court. He locked eyes with Jaime, seeing panic. Jaime had not known she would do this, but Cersei was desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things. Ned cleared his throat, stepping forward. "Your Grace," Cersei cut him off. "Your Grace, I will not have my children's honor questioned by northern slander. If Lord Stark has evidence, let him present it here and now. Let the whole court see how he dares to defame them." Robert's eyes darted to Ned, then back to Cersei. "Evidence? What's going on, Ned? Out with it." Ned swallowed. This was a nightmare. If he told the truth now, a slaughter might ensue. If he lied, he'd be complicit in a deception that might destroy the realm anyway. He glanced at Sansa and Arya, trembling in the corner of the great hall. Then at Jaime, who stood near Cersei, poised to defend her from whatever came next. Then at Littlefinger, who was watching with rapt attention, as if enjoying every second. Varys hovered at the fringes, an unreadable expression on his face. Time seemed to slow. Ned felt an unbearable weight on his shoulders. He thought of the children. He thought of the vows he'd made to protect the realm, to be Robert's friend and counsel. Finally, he looked the king in the eye. "Your Grace," he began, voice steady as he could manage. "I have uncovered rumors about the children's paternity, but I do not have definitive proof." He glanced pointedly at Cersei, who glared daggers at him. "I cannot in good conscience condemn them without certainty." Cersei's tone was cold. "Is that so, Lord Stark? You've been prying in corners for weeks, chasing your so-called suspicion. Present it." Ned forced himself to keep calm. He turned back to Robert. "I found that every Baratheon in recorded history has had black hair, until Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen. They have all the features of House Lannister, not Baratheon." He paused. "But perhaps the gods saw fit to gift them different traits. Perhaps it's a rare quirk of fate. I have no conclusive proof, only coincidences." Robert's brow furrowed. He stared at Cersei. "Is that what this is about? Hair color? You interrupted my feast for that. I want to put an end to these baseless accusations," Cersei hissed. Robert waved a hand. "Then say it's nonsense. The boy's golden hair is from your side of the family." "What of it?" A ripple of tension. People looked from Robert to Cersei to Ned. Ned realized that Robert was drunk and unwilling to consider the possibility that his children were not his. Perhaps the idea was too humiliating. Cersei pressed her advantage, stepping closer to Robert. I want you to silence Stark, before these rumors spread and disgrace our family." The king glared at Ned, conflict evident in his eyes. "Ned," he growled, "this is dangerous talk. Do you truly believe I am not the father of my own children?" Ned saw how precarious the moment was. If he said yes, Robert might explode in fury. If he said no, the seeds of truth might remain buried forever. He took a slow breath, remembering Jaime's words. War could burn thousands. "Your Grace," he answered carefully, "I only say that the realm whispers these things, and I have found evidence that concerns me. But I have not concluded that it's true. I do not want to spread rumors. I only want the truth." Cersei seized on that. "So you have nothing substantial." She turned to the hall. "There, you see? Nothing but rumor, innuendo. Lord Stark's suspicions have no basis in fact." A wave of relief rippled across some faces. Others looked uncertain, including members of the small council. Littlefinger frowned slightly. This was not the explosive confrontation he had anticipated. Varys's eyes flicked around, taking in every reaction. Robert sank back onto his throne, picking up his goblet. "Bloody hell," he muttered. "The next time you bring me rumors, Ned, make sure you've got something better than hair color." Ned inclined his head, swallowing his misgivings. For the moment, the immediate crisis was defused. But the tension remained a living thing in that throne room. Cersei took that as her victory, eyes gleaming triumph. She turned on her heel, gesturing for Jaime to follow her out. Jaime, catching Ned's eye, hesitated for a heartbeat, then trailed after his sister. The hall erupted in hushed chatter. Robert looked furious, draining his goblet in one large swallow. Ned silently withdrew, Sansa and Arya rushing to his side, each with questions on their lips. He only murmured assurances, no answers. The feast resumed, though without the carefree mood of earlier. Later that night, in Cersei's chamber, she raged at Jaime. "Why didn't you speak? Why didn't you crush Stark's nonsense?" Jaime tried to calm her. He said he had no proof, that it was just rumor. That might be the end of it. "It's never the end," she snapped. "He won't stop until he has proof. He's too honorable for that. You have to do something, Jaime." Jaime rubbed his brow. "I just saved us from a public disaster. If he had proclaimed the truth, Robert might have gone mad." Cersei glowered. "Fine, but do not think this is over." She paused, then with a sudden twist of her lips, asked, "Is it possible that you've grown fond of him, this wolf? Are you losing your edge, Kingslayer?" Jaime's expression hardened. "I'm just trying to keep all of us alive. This city is a nest of vipers. Don't mistake caution for weakness." Cersei's eyes glinted. "If you say so." She dismissed him with a flick of her hand. Once alone, Jaime felt torn in 1,000 directions. He had to protect the children, but also prevent Ned from unleashing Robert's fury. He also worried about Tywin's response should he learn the truth. And on top of it all, Littlefinger was weaving his webs. If the realm turned to chaos, House Lannister might devour itself from within. Tyrion, if he were here, might have offered some counsel, but he was off somewhere, pursuing his own amusements. Jaime felt isolated, pinned between loyalty to his sister, love for his secret children, and a hesitant respect for the one man he would rather have as a friend than an enemy. In the Tower of the Hand, Ned paced, cursing himself. He had let the moment pass, the chance to reveal the truth. But was that truly a mistake? He recalled how Robert had looked. Blearily furious, drunk, dismissive. If Ned had forced the truth upon him, the results would have been catastrophic. Perhaps he had saved lives tonight, but the cost was that the lie persisted. The children would sit the throne under false pretenses someday. That, too, was a travesty against honor and the rightful line of succession. Did the rightful line even matter, though, if it meant innocence burned? He sighed, thinking once again of how Jaime had come to him in confidence. In an odd way, that single gesture of honesty bound them. Ned was not about to break that small trust by unleashing the truth in public, not without giving Jaime a chance to find a path forward that spared the children. Could this truly be the start of a friendship between two men who, in another life, would have been mortal enemies? Ned did not know, but he found himself almost hoping. If only the gods would give them time to find a solution before chaos erupted. But in the capital, time was a luxury rarely granted. And Littlefinger, standing in his solar with a smug grin and a glass of wine, was already calculating new ways to set Lannister against Lannister, and Lannister against Stark, until the entire board was engulfed in flames. Flames in which Petyr Baelish intended to forge a crown of his own making. Though no swords had been drawn yet, war brewed all the same, hidden behind forced smiles and candlelit feasts. Ned Stark and Jaime Lannister found themselves leaning, oddly, on each other's unspoken decency, even as forces on every side conspired to rip them apart. They each knew that if the truth was laid bare at the wrong time, the realm would drown in blood. And while neither man trusted the other entirely, neither wanted that bloodshed to begin. So they stood on a fragile line, forging a tenuous bond. In the weeks and months to come, that bond would be tested again and again. As the wheels of power turned, the snakes of the court writhed, and the storms of war rumbled across the seven kingdoms. They might have one chance to spare the realm from the worst. But in a land where deception and ambition ruled, where families turned on each other for the sake of crowns and gold, it would take more than a reluctant alliance between a wolf and a lion to prevent the chaos. Even so, for the moment, Ned Stark and Jaime Lannister shared a small spark of hope. Hope that honor might yet hold back the tide of greed, vengeance, and fear. And though neither man would ever have predicted it, from that spark a genuine friendship could grow, if fate allowed it to survive the trials to come. Outside the Red Keep, the winds off Blackwater Bay carried the tang of salt into King's Landing. Torchlight flickered against the outer walls, and the city's thousands of inhabitants gradually settled into another tense night. Though no battle lines were drawn, many in the capital felt an unseen conflict brewing, like a pressure in the air before a lightning strike. Inside the castle corridors, hushed footsteps and cautious whispers replaced the day's clamor. Ned Stark, Hand of the King, returned to his chamber that evening with a royal of conflicting emotions. His daughters were Abed, Sansa in a nest of courtly illusions, and Arya in restless, unladylike dreams. Ned paused in the sitting room, dismissing his guards, and removed his cloak to relieve the day's weight from his shoulders. The confrontation in the throne room still echoed in his mind. Cersei had all but dared him to accuse her openly, and he had let the moment pass, lacking the final proof he needed and fearing a bloodbath. It was the first time in many years that Ned had felt such moral compromise. In a different life, he would have declared what he knew. Yet now he hesitated. He moved to the open window. Below, King's Landing sprawled in darkness, the homes lit by scattered lanterns, the harbor beyond reflecting moonlight on the water. The sounds of distant laughter and harsh bargaining floated on the wind. He tried to find comfort in the city's mundane life, but his mind circled back to the looming threat. Robert sat the throne in name, but the Lannisters held the purse strings and 1,000 deadly secrets. And then there was Petyr Baelish, ever smiling, weaving new nets to ensure that if a single thread snapped, he would reap advantage amid the chaos. Ned set his jaw. He had to walk a razor's edge, do what was right without casting the realm into war. And though it astonished him, he knew he could rely on Jaime Lannister for help, at least to some extent. The thought felt strange, like clutching the hand of a known enemy to keep from drowning. Yet that was the position the city's intrigues had forced him into. He resolved to speak with Jaime again soon. The Queen's dramatic performance in the throne room likely had them both reeling. If they didn't coordinate, Littlefinger would find a way to turn them into weapons against each other, or worse still, to inspire a schism within House Lannister itself that might roil over into stark bloodshed. With a final, weary exhalation, Ned moved to his bedchamber, hoping sleep would offer him a temporary respite. That same night, across the keep, Jaime Lannister paced in his own apartments, restless. He had pulled off his court attire, loosening the collar as though it strangled him. Cersei had swept away hours ago, refusing to discuss the fiasco in any further detail. She demanded results, demanded a solution, and yet she offered him nothing but scorn for not silencing Ned Stark immediately. Jaime had tried to reason that a public confrontation could have ended in a bloodbath. Robert's wrath was not to be taken lightly, especially if he felt made a fool in front of the entire court. But Cersei, cornered by her own guilt, had grown too frantic to appreciate such logic. A knock came at the door. Jaime snatched up a short dagger from the table, though he didn't expect immediate danger. When he opened the door, he found Tyrion standing there, the dwarf's eyes sharp with curiosity. "May I come in, dear brother?" Tyrion asked, leaning on his staff. "Or must I wrestle with that sharp toy first?" Jaime sighed, stepping aside. "Enter, if you insist." Tyrion shuffled in, taking in the scattered cloak on the chair, the half-emptied wine pitcher. He arched an eyebrow. "A rough night, I see." Jaime left the door ajar, though he doubted eavesdroppers would learn much. "Every night here is rough lately. Where have you been?" "Oh, about the city," Tyrion said cryptically. "Visiting certain establishments that provide superior conversation. For a price." He rubbed his chin. "I heard about the show in the throne room. Word travels fast." Cersei practically demanded that Lord Stark accuse her in front of half the court. My, that was bold. Jaime sheathed the dagger. Bold or foolish? We might be picking up the pieces for months. Tyrion hopped up onto a chair, letting his legs dangle. "So, the question is, do we expect Ned Stark to make another move soon? Or has Cersei frightened him into silence?" Jaime stared into the half-full wine cup. "He's not frightened, but he might be unsure how to proceed. He won't throw caution to the wind. He's too worried about the cost." Tyrion's gaze flicked over Jaime's face. "You sound as though you've been speaking to him." Jaime hesitated, then allowed a small nod. "I have." "Ah," Tyrion said, the corners of his mouth turning up slyly. "You and Lord Stark have been chatting behind closed doors?" "Don't make that face," Jaime growled. "You know I don't revel in intrigue, but I don't want the city drenched in blood. And if Stark can be reasoned with, I'd rather try that than burn everything down." Tyrion's eyes narrowed in mild surprise. "This is an interesting development. The Jaime I knew liked a good fight, but perhaps you've changed your tastes." Jaime scowled. "I've seen enough slaughter, brother." "Perhaps so." Tyrion studied him for a moment. "Well, if you want my opinion, and I assume you do, else you wouldn't have let me in, be wary of both sides. I suspect Littlefinger is stirring the pot, hoping to set you and Cersei against each other, or against your father, or both. Pitting Lannisters against themselves is an old pastime for many envious courtiers. But Peter Baelish is especially dangerous because he knows how to turn the smallest friction into a grand conflagration." Jaime sank onto a bench. "Father, if he learns how close we are to being exposed..." He exhaled sharply. "I'm not sure what Tywin will do. Likely something swift, brutal, and containing a good deal of gold," Tyrion quipped. "He's not one to let family shame overshadow House Lannister's power. If Cersei's children are proven to be illegitimate, the scandal alone would cost us alliances. Father would see it as a mortal threat to the house name." Jaime nodded heavily. "Then you see why I need a better path. One that doesn't end with Robert's axe or father's wrath." Tyrion hopped down from the chair. "Indeed. And what part do I play in your designs, dear brother?" Jaime looked at him intently. "Keep your ears open. Watch Baelish, gather what you can. Watch Varys too, though I suspect he already knows more than any of us. And if you have a chance to steer the conversation away from war, do so. I may not have the mind for politics, but you do." Tyrion gave a mocking little bow. "Your humble servant. I do so love a good riddle of courtly intrigue. I'll sniff around and see what surfaces." He turned to go, but paused at the door, glancing back. "One last thing. Does Ned Stark know that you sired the royal children?" Jaime's heart thudded. "He suspects. He's all but certain. But he's kept it from Robert for now." Tyrion whistled low. "That's a precarious arrangement. You trust his restraint." Jaime ran a hand through his hair. "I trust that he doesn't want the bloodshed. That might be enough." For the moment, Tyrion nodded slowly. Well, 7 save us all. With that, he slipped out, leaving Jaime to brood over how quickly the ground could shift beneath them. Early the next morning, Ned rose before dawn and prepared to meet with a few of his key retainers in the Tower of the Hand. Word of the fiasco in the throne room had spread, so the men loyal to him, northerners mostly, wore suspicious, uneasy expressions. Ned had always been a pillar of honesty. They couldn't fathom why he was hesitating to reveal the wrongdoing he'd discovered. When Ned entered the small solar, they all stood. "Lord Stark," Roderick Castle said, mustache bristling with concern. "We heard there was a confrontation last night." Ned sat and gestured for the rest to be seated. Queen Cersei forced the matter publicly, but the king would have none of it, and I chose not to press my findings without undeniable proof. One of the younger men, Jory, furrowed his brow. "But my lord, you found more than enough hints to suspect the children are not Robert's. If that's true, it means—" Ned silenced him with a small wave. "It means the line of succession is compromised. Yes, but if we reveal it in open court and Robert believes it, the bloodshed will be immense. The Lannisters will not go quietly. The children—" He paused, remembering the mountain slaughter of the Targaryen babes. "The children might not be spared. None of you have seen Robert in his deepest fury. I have. It's not something I wish upon innocents." He could tell many of them were torn. Northerners had a straightforward sense of right and wrong. They wanted the treachery confronted, consequences be damned. But Ned's face was grim. "We must tread carefully, or we risk unleashing a civil war the likes of which we haven't seen since Robert's rebellion, or worse." Roderick eventually inclined his head. "We follow your lead, my lord. Though I confess, it's not an easy burden." "It's a burden we must bear," Ned said quietly. "Keep vigilant. Littlefinger is weaving a trap, and I fear it extends to all sides. Do not let your tongues wag. Speak of this to no one outside these walls." They nodded, and the meeting dispersed into tense silence. As dawn's early light made its way across King's Landing's steep rooftops, Peter Baelish sat in his private chambers, counting coins and turning over the implications of last night's spectacle. A chessboard lay on a table, pieces carved in the likeness of the 7 kingdoms' various houses. He lightly slid a lion piece across the board, considering its potential squares. House Lannister was powerful but fractious. Cersei's bristling paranoia, Jaime's uncharacteristic cooperation with Ned Stark, Tywin's overshadowing presence far away in the west, and Tyrion's cunning all threatened to tear the house in different directions if pressed the right way. Across from the lion stood a wolf-piece House Stark. In the actual realm, Ned Stark remained a formidable moral force, but Peter guessed Ned was too honorable to strike swiftly. That gave Peter time to manipulate events to his liking. Then there was the king's piece, shaped like a stag. Robert was at once the realm's figurehead and its largest liability. He was so frequently inebriated or off hunting that he seldom realized how precarious his rule had become. Peter picked up the wolf and the lion, letting them clash gently. "A quiet war," he murmured. "One that might tear them both if I simply help them along." He set the pieces down, then picked up a small mockingbird figurine, a personal sigil he had commissioned. He smiled at it. "But first, let's ensure they cannot reconcile. Because if Stark and Jaime Lannister truly become friends, oh, that would be so very inconvenient." He had already begun planting seeds. A rumor here, a rumor there. Next, he needed to further stoke the tensions within House Lannister itself. What if Tywin were to suspect that Jaime was fraternizing with the enemy? Or if Cersei believed that Jaime was going soft out of guilt? Peter drummed his fingers, finalizing his plan. He would dispatch a few carefully chosen letters, some genuine, others forged, to stir up trouble between father and children. He would also quietly tip off certain Westerlords that House Lannister might soon face a crisis, encouraging them to seek new alliances or withdraw from Lannister influence. The more cracks in their foundation, the harder they'd scramble, and the more likely they'd lash out at Stark or at one another. Humming to himself, Peter Baelish began writing by the morning's first light. Meanwhile, news traveled to Casterly Rock. Tywin Lannister, Lord of the West, read the letter brought in haste by one of his riders. It spoke in vague but urgent terms about tensions in King's Landing, about how the Queen and Lord Stark were nearing open conflict, and how Jaime seemed entangled in the middle. Tywin's stern face showed little emotion, but inwardly, he recognized the potential threat to House Lannister's power. He turned the parchment over in his hands. There was a mention of debts the crown still owed to House Lannister, and of Cersei's precarious position in Robert's court. All of it smelled of gossip, perhaps half-truths. But Tywin did not ignore even half-truths when they might affect his legacy. If the rumors about the royal children's parentage grew, it could ruin everything he had built for the family. Tywin would not let that happen. He took immediate steps. He penned a letter to Kevan Lannister to gather men discreetly, in case House Lannister needed to flex its military might. Then, in a swirl of red cloak, Tywin left his private solar and summoned his closest advisors. He was not the sort of man to be caught off guard. If necessary, he would ride to King's Landing himself to quash this trouble. But first, he had to see how the pieces on the board might move. 3 days after the throne room confrontation, life in King's Landing returned to its usual swirl of petty drama, at least on the surface. Street urchins hawked pies on corners, merchants argued over coin, and the city reeled under the summer heat. But inside the Red Keep, tensions continued to brew. The king announced a surprise hunting holiday, planning to leave the city for a few days with a small retinue of loyal drinking companions. Ned pleaded for him to remain and address pressing matters in the small council, but Robert laughed it off, proclaiming the city too stifling. The morning Robert departed, Ned was left standing in the courtyard, cursing the king's irresponsibility under his breath. Jaime, in his Kingsguard whites, mounted a horse to ride along. Robert had demanded that at least one Kingsguard accompany him, and Barristan Selmy was otherwise engaged with his duties. As Jaime swung into the saddle, he spotted Ned across the yard. For a moment their eyes met. Jaime gave a minute nod, a silent acknowledgement of the uneasy alliance they'd formed. Ned returned the nod gravely. He suspected Robert's absence would embolden the Queen, or spur some new mischief from Littlefinger, and Jaime would be off in the forest, babysitting a drunken king. Not ideal for either of them. Outside the gates, the king's party clattered off, dust rising behind them on the road. Ned turned away, heading back toward the Tower of the Hand with a sinking feeling that something pivotal was about to happen in Robert's absence. That evening, Ned sat alone in his solar with a bowl of cooled stew, half-eaten. His appetite had faded. He was expecting news, any news, that might tell him how the city would move now that Robert was away. A quiet knock at the door startled him. He rose to answer it. To his mild surprise, he found Tyrion Lannister standing there, wearing a well-fitted doublet of black and crimson. "Lord Tyrion," Ned said guardedly, "this is unexpected." Tyrion smiled disarmingly. "I do love being unexpected. May I come in?" Ned ushered him inside, uneasy but curious. No guards accompanied Tyrion. As soon as the door shut, Tyrion glanced at the half-finished stew. "I hope I'm not interrupting your supper." Ned shrugged. "I'd lost my appetite." He gestured Tyrion to a chair. "What brings you here at this hour?" Tyrion settled, his short legs dangling off the seat. "My dear brother is off to the forest with the king, which leaves certain gaps in our city's power structure. When Jaime is here, he keeps certain impulses in check. With him gone, the Queen might push matters further. And, well, I worried about what that might mean for you." Ned raised a brow. "I can handle the Queen." Tyrion steepled his fingers. "So you believe, but you underestimate how ruthless Cersei can be when she feels cornered. She once reminded me that if a dangerous truth were discovered, she would do anything, to protect her children. That includes disposing of any threat. And you think she might see me as a threat? I don't think Lord Stark." "I know." Tyrion eyed Ned calmly. "You have enough suspicion, and presumably enough proof to ruin her. She may not wait patiently for you to decide whether to tell Robert. She might choose to remove the problem. Ned's jaw tightened. He had guarded himself against that possibility, but hearing it stated so plainly was unsettling. Then is this a warning or a threat? A warning, Tyrion said, lifting his palms. I'd rather not see any more heads on spikes at the Red Keep's gate. The city is tense enough. Besides, I have a fondness for life's more complicated puzzles. If my sister murders you in cold blood, the puzzle ends. The city spirals toward chaos. I prefer alternatives. Ned studied Tyrion's face. He sensed sincerity there. Tyrion seemed to value cunning over brute force. You say you prefer alternatives. What do you propose? Tyrion hesitated, glancing at the door, then spoke quietly. I propose that we keep this knowledge in stalemate until we can orchestrate a safer outcome. My father is gathering troops in the west quietly. That alone should give you pause. You don't want to provoke him. And if you kill Cersei or proclaim her children bastards, Tywin will descend on King's Landing in open war. Countless thousands will die. Ned's mouth went dry. And what safer outcome can be found? Your sister is the mother of those children. Robert is their supposed father, but Tyrion cut in, voice unwavering. We arrange for a peaceful resolution. Perhaps a quiet annulment or a forced separation, or a secret arrangement in which Robert acknowledges them anyway. He waved a hand dismissively. I can't say, but I do know that if we let this explode now, the entire realm bleeds. A quiet breath escaped Ned. You sound like Jaime. Tyrion grinned faintly. I'll take that as a compliment. Underneath his swagger, Jaime is more intelligent than most realize. He wants to avoid the carnage. So do I. Ned stared at the dwarf. He had spent months hating House Lannister's arrogance, but Tyrion displayed an unusual candor. And what if Cersei doesn't want such a resolution? She might prefer civil war if she thinks she can control the outcome. Then we ensure she doesn't have that option, Tyrion replied, a spark of cunning in his eyes. A cornered lion is dangerous, but so is a cornered wolf. What we need is enough leverage on her that she'd hesitate. For instance, if she tries to kill you, I will do everything in my power to ensure that father does not support her. If she realizes she might stand alone, well, she might reconsider. Ned frowned. And you truly have enough sway with Lord Tywin to influence him? Tyrion looked away briefly, as though recalling decades of complicated family dynamics. Father underestimates me, but he does value results. If I can show him that Cersei's plan to maintain her children's claims is a bigger liability than a quiet arrangement, he might rein her in. He locked eyes with Ned again. It's not a guarantee, but it might be the only card we have. Ned considered everything, the weight of it pressing on him. The realm was a tinderbox. Tyrion seemed to be offering a path that might avoid immediate conflagration, though it required trusting a Lannister. I'll think on it, Ned said. Thank you for the warning. Tyrion inclined his head. Just be cautious, Lord Stark. My sister's whispers travel fast. If she suspects that you and Jaime, or you and I are plotting behind her back, she might strike first. With that, Tyrion left. Ned remained by the flickering candlelight, alone with his thoughts, wishing Robert were here to take responsibility for his own marriage. But the king was far away, likely deep in his cups, leaving Ned to shield the realm from a storm that no one else seemed willing to defuse. In those same days, far outside the city, King Robert's hunting party moved through the dense forests beyond the Kingswood, chasing boars and stags. The king's entourage included a handful of knights, a few loyal squires, and Jaime Lannister riding near the front. Robert drank heavily each evening, sang bawdy songs, reminisced about his youth. Jaime could hardly stand the reek of stale ale. He longed to return to the capital, where the real threats waited. But duty was duty. He'd pledged to guard the king, even if the king was more likely to die from a surfeit of wine than from any assassin's arrow. Late one night, after most of the party had gone to sleep around the crackling fires, Robert waved Jaime over. They sat side by side on a log, the darkness punctuated by the hiss of burning wood and the buzz of insects. Robert took another swig of wine, belched, and cast a bleary glance at Jaime. "You're too stiff, Kingslayer. Loosen up." Jaime swallowed a wry remark. "Apologies, Your Grace. We can't all be as practiced at leisure as you." Robert snorted. "Ha! You mock me, but you're not wrong. I could best any man at feasting and drinking once. Now, well, my belly's grown." He slapped it and sighed. "All the more reason to savor these hunts. I should have brought Ned along. He always was too serious. Good man, though honorable to a fault." Jaime tried to keep his face neutral. Robert had no idea what turmoil was brewing between Ned and Cersei. "He's certainly devoted to the realm," Jaime said softly. Robert muttered, draining his cup. "Man tried to stop me leaving for this hunt, but I told him, 'Damn your caution. I need a break from that blasted throne.'" He leaned back, resting the cup on his knee. "I should have stayed a warrior, Jaime, or maybe a Sellsword. Let someone else wear the crown. I'm no king." Jaime studied Robert's profile, the broad shoulders gone to fat, the eyes ringed with exhaustion. "Is that what you truly want, Your Grace?" "Too late for that now," Robert slurred. "A man can't just stop being king." He laughed bitterly, then lowered his voice. "You know, Cersei and I can't even stand her anymore. She's cunning as a viper, and she hates me just as much. I wanted Lyanna, and I got a Lannister. 7 help me." He gave Jaime a bleary, sidelong look, as if remembering that the queen was Jaime's twin. "No offense." Jaime forced a thin smile. "None taken, Your Grace." Robert's gaze drifted across the camp, where the rest of the men snored and shifted in their bedrolls. "Some nights I wonder, did she ever love me? Or was it all a pretense for power?" He let out a hollow chuckle. "We never even had a real wedding night, you know? I was too drunk. And after that, well..." He took a shaky breath, eyes glazing with memory or regret. "Sometimes I wonder if Joffrey is really mine. That boy has none of the Baratheon look. Does he?" Jaime's heart lurched into his throat. He fought to keep his face calm. "He resembles his mother," Jaime said carefully. "Traits skip generations." Robert grunted. "Maybe. Or maybe the gods enjoy a jest." His eyes were red-rimmed, a man teetering on the edge of self-pity. Then he shook his head violently, as if banishing the thought. "Bah, enough talk. More wine." He tried to stand, nearly tumbling over. Jaime caught him by the elbow. "Easy, Your Grace," Jaime said, guiding him back down. "Let's get you settled. It's late, and you can hunt better on a clear head." Robert snorted. Clear head, indeed, but he let Jaime help him stumble to his tent. As Jaime secured the tent flaps, he reflected on how close Robert was to unearthing the truth on his own. The king had doubts. If only he truly knew. Back in King's Landing, Cersei prowled through her private chambers, her mind racing. She had new tidings. A messenger from her father's hall had arrived with a sealed missive. Within, Tywin demanded details. Why was there talk of conflict with the Starks? And why were rumors swirling that the children's lineage might be questioned? He threatened to come to King's Landing in person if she did not swiftly rectify the situation. Cersei felt the burn of shame and anger. Her father's disapproval stung like acid, especially when she was trying to hold the city in her grasp. She flung the parchment onto a table, startling her maid. The queen raged inwardly that Jaime was absent, leaving her alone to navigate the swirling intrigues. In her private reflection, she admitted that the fiasco in the throne room had not gone as planned. Ned Stark had refused to reveal the secret, leaving her humiliated rather than vindicated. That only hardened her resolve to remove him before he could gather more proof or cunning allies. Summoning one of her most trusted Lannister guards, she gave quiet orders to arrange a meeting with Lord Peter Baelish. She despised relying on Littlefinger, but he knew how to manipulate the hidden currents of the city. If there was a subtle way to ensure Ned Stark's demise, or at least to crush his influence, Baelish would know it. And if that failed, she would turn to more direct methods. The moonlight gleamed on her golden hair as she contemplated the lengths she was willing to go to protect her children's secret. Late that same night, Petyr Baelish was finishing a glass of sweet wine in his opulent apartments, complete with plush chairs, ornate rugs, and little mockingbird emblems on the draperies, when Cersei's summons arrived. The Lannister guard stood at the threshold, formal and stiff. Petyr flashed his lazy smile. "Her Grace wishes to see me at this hour? My, what a privilege," the guard only repeated. "The Queen is waiting." Petyr set aside his cup and followed, adjusting his well-fitted doublet. He arrived at Cersei's solar to find the Queen standing by a fireplace, her expression carved from ice. She dismissed the guard with a curt nod, then turned on Petyr. "You've been meddling," Cersei accused, emerald eyes snapping. "I know you've visited Ned Stark," whispered in his ear, tried to feed him false leads. "You've also whispered to the courtiers of my father's impending displeasure. I want the truth, Petyr. Whose side are you on?" Petyr spread his hands in mock innocence. "I am on the side of stability, Your Grace. I want what's best for the realm, and for you." She nearly spat. "Don't lie to me. You want to see me undone as much as any of the other wolves in this city. But perhaps you also value survival. If so, help me remove the greatest threat to my family's future." "Ned Stark," Petyr guessed, stepping closer, studying her face. "Are you certain he's the greatest threat? Not your father? Not your drunken husband?" Cersei hissed. "Do not presume. If Ned Stark reveals what he knows, it will all come crashing down. My father, for all his stern talk, cannot defend us from that. I need Stark discredited or eliminated. Quietly, if possible. Can you make that happen?" Petyr feigned consideration, tapping a finger against his lips. "Discrediting him might be simpler than killing him outright. He is well loved among the common folk for his reputation of honor. But if the right rumors spread, for instance, that he's plotting against the king, that he has conspired with foreign agents," he shrugged. "Foolish, but the city loves scandal." Cersei's gaze flickered. "He's too careful for that. He rarely leaves the Red Keep. He keeps no paramours, no hidden vices." "Then we invent them," Petyr said, voice smooth. "I have a talent for illusions. Perhaps a letter or two suggesting he's in correspondence with the Targaryen girl across the sea, claiming he's urging her to return and claim the throne. The right forgeries, the right whispers, and the king, drunken though he is, might see Ned as a traitor." Cersei considered it, a calculating glint in her eyes. "If the king believed that, he would order Ned's head. And that would solve our problem, provided it doesn't come back to me. Can you do that?" Petyr's lips curved. "For the right price, anything is possible." Cersei let out a scornful laugh. "Name your price, then. Gold? Titles?" "Gold is always welcome," Petyr said with a courteous bow. "But moreover, I want a secure position in the new regime. If House Stark falls and House Lannister remains ascendant, I would be quite grateful to see my investments in the city's infrastructure, shall we say, rewarded. The Master of Coin might wish to open new ports, new trade lines." He paused, letting Cersei read between the lines. A bigger slice of the realm's commerce, more official support for his holdings. She drummed her fingers on the mantle. "We shall see. Do what must be done. But if this fails, or if Stark escapes your trap—" "It will not fail," Petyr murmured. "When I topple a piece, it stays toppled." He watched the firelight dance across her face, half admiring the fierce resolve that had driven her to these lengths. "Give me a little time, Your Grace. Once the king returns from his hunt, we shall deliver him the narrative he needs to see Ned Stark as an enemy." Cersei nodded curtly, though she could not entirely hide her unease. "See that you do." Petyr gave her his most courteous bow, then slipped away into the corridors with a triumphant flicker in his eye. He loved it when cunning was rewarded. And if, in the process, he also sowed more tension between Cersei and Jaime, so much the better. After all, a divided Lannister house was simpler to manipulate. 2 days later, Ned Stark woke to find a slim scroll slipped under his door. The wax seal was broken, suggesting it had been tampered with. Inside, the message was brief. A rumor about movements of gold cloaks within the city, about new shipping manifest changes. Puzzled, Ned read it twice. It seemed trivial, except that it implied the Master of Coin's office was adjusting trade taxes in a way that might funnel funds quietly to certain private pockets. Littlefinger's pockets, perhaps, or maybe someone else's. Frowning, Ned dressed in haste and set out to investigate. He had no illusions that rooting out financial irregularities would quell the greater threat looming around the children's parentage. But every scrap of knowledge counted in King's Landing. If he could prove that Petyr Baelish was misusing funds, it might give him leverage. He would need every advantage he could get. Before the sun was high, Ned found himself descending into the labyrinthine corridors beneath the Red Keep, the older storerooms and dusty records chambers. Accompanied by only a single guard, he rummaged through ledgers of cargo shipments, cross-referencing them with the city's official tariff logs. The numbers sometimes contradicted each other. It reeked of Baelish's style, forging documents, creating false shortfalls. Perhaps it was just typical Master of Coin graft, or perhaps it was part of a larger plot. Ned's eyes narrowed. If Baelish was funneling coin to pay for bribes or hush money, that might tie directly into the plot to discredit him or manipulate the realm. Intent on his search, Ned scarcely noticed the time passing. Down there, in the half-lit storerooms, dust tickled his nose and the smell of old parchment hung heavy. Finally, after hours, he found a ledger that bore Baelish's personal sigil. Inside were notations about special disbursements, amounts allocated with no explanation. Ned forced himself to remain calm. He had something now, a clue that Baelish might be preparing a slush fund for an upcoming move. Satisfied that he had gleaned all he could for the moment, Ned turned to leave. He and his guard made their way along a narrow corridor, their boots echoing on the stone. Then they heard footsteps approaching from the darkness ahead, multiple sets by the sound. Ned gripped the hilt of his sword, feeling his guard do the same. A pair of gold cloaks emerged from around the corner, flanking a slight figure in rich attire. Petyr Baelish. He smiled in the torchlight, but his eyes were cold. "My Lord Hand, you do like the dusty corners of the keep, don't you?" Ned's mouth tightened. "Lord Baelish, I was examining old records. As Hand of the King, that's my prerogative." "Of course," Petyr said with a silken purr. "One might wonder why you didn't ask me or my clerks to provide you with whatever you needed, unless you feared we might hide something." His polite facade never wavered. Ned stood firm. "I prefer to see the raw data myself." Baelish's gold cloaks casually blocked the corridor behind him, a subtle intimidation. "It's a pity you wasted your time. Those records are notoriously disorganized. Should you have questions, I'd be delighted to clarify them. Somewhere more comfortable, perhaps." Ned's guard bristled, sensing the unspoken threat. Ned kept his composure. "I'm fine where I am." "Very well," Baelish said, his smile fading slightly. "I only came to ensure you had not lost your way. The Red Keep can be a maze to outsiders." He emphasized the last word with a note of smugness. Ned responded coolly, "I have all I need here. Now, if you'll excuse me." Baelish stepped aside, though his gold cloaks did not move until Ned and his guard stepped very close. The tension was palpable. Then Baelish's men parted, allowing Ned to pass. Baelish's voice followed him down the corridor. "Do be careful, Lord Stark. It's all too easy to stumble in the dark." Ned did not answer, but as he ascended the winding steps to the surface, his mind churned. Baelish's presence down there confirmed that he was watching the same records. Perhaps he was removing or altering ledgers to cover his tracks. The real question: how far would Baelish go to ensure Ned never revealed what he found? Another invisible cord of tension tightened around the city, and Ned knew time was running short. That night, a sudden commotion roused Ned's household in the Tower of the Hand. Horns sounded near the city gates. Shouts carried on the wind. Ned hurried to a window and peered out. Torches moved like fireflies near the main gatehouse. His heart skipped. Had Tywin Lannister arrived with an army? Or had Robert returned unexpectedly? Moments later, one of his guards reported that King Robert was back, days earlier than planned. Apparently, The boar hunt had ended abruptly when the king injured himself in a drunken misstep, twisting his leg. Rather than remain in the field, Robert demanded to return, cursing and moaning the whole way. So now, in the dead of night, he limped into the city, flanked by Jaime Lannister and the other knights. Ned quickly made his way to the courtyard, where a host of soldiers was already assisting the king off his horse. Robert scowled, his face flushed with pain and intoxication. "Fools," he roared, "I can walk." But his attempt to bear weight on the leg ended with a grimace and a half-stumble. Jaime, standing close, caught him under the arm. "Easy, your grace." Robert snarled something incoherent, then let Jaime and another knight help him to a bench by the nearest brazier. Ned approached, bowing. "Your grace, what happened?" Robert glared at him. "Boar got the better of me, that's what. Or maybe it was the blasted wine. Damned miserable night in the wild. I should have known better." Ned eyed the blood-stained bandage around Robert's thigh. "Shall I send for Grand Maester Pycelle?" "Already done," Jaime said. "He's on his way." The king insisted on riding back to the city rather than let the maester tend him in a field tent. Jaime's face was lined with worry that he tried to hide behind a mask of stoicism. Robert slapped at the bandage. "I'll be fine. Just a scratch. I've had worse." Grand Maester Pycelle arrived in a flurry, fussing over Robert, ordering men to carry him gently into the keep. The king cursed and flailed, but the men lifted him with care. Ned stood aside, letting them pass. As Robert was borne away, the king's eyes drifted to Ned. "We'll talk tomorrow, Ned. Have a council ready. I want a full briefing. No excuses. This city always goes to hell when I'm gone." Then he was carried off into the corridor, his curses echoing. Jaime lingered in the courtyard, rolling his sore shoulders from the long ride. Blood darkened the cuff of his white surcoat. He noticed Ned and gave a single nod. "That was more eventful than I anticipated," he muttered. "No real huntsman would have drunk that much before facing a boar." Ned moved closer. "How bad is it?" Jaime shook his head. "Deep enough to cause concern if it festers. Pycelle will dose him with milk of the poppy, apply poultices. But the king's not in the best shape these days. If fever sets in..." He let that possibility hang in the humid night air. Ned exhaled. "The city is on edge as it is. If Robert becomes bedridden or worse..." "Chaos," Jaime agreed. "Cersei will try to seize power if she sees an opening. Others will do likewise." Ned studied Jaime's tired face. "If you're able, join the council tomorrow. We should keep each other informed." Jaime hesitated, glancing around to ensure no eavesdroppers. "I'll do what I can, though as Kingsguard, I've little official standing. But yes, I'll watch. Too many want Robert dead. Maybe even he wants it himself, the way he's been acting." They parted ways, each weighed down by the sense that Robert's injury might be a prelude to something far more dire. The following day, the small council gathered in the Tower of the Hand's chambers, as the king's own bedchamber was too cramped for so many men. The king, heavily dosed with milk of the poppy, struggled to stay focused. Cersei sat at his side, wearing an expression of concern that Ned suspected was mostly for show. Jaime took up a position near the door, arms folded in classic Kingsguard stance, though he was not officially part of the council. Nearby stood Grand Maester Pycelle, fussing about Robert's bandages. Varys drifted in like a silent shadow, while Peter Baelish arrived with a swirl of fine brocade. Renly Baratheon, the king's younger brother, had come too, face anxious. Once assembled, Robert growled, "All right, out with it. What crisis has the city conjured while I was off nearly getting gored?" Ned exchanged glances with Varys and Renly. It fell to Ned as hand to speak first. "Your Grace, the city remains stable for now, though tensions run high. We have certain rumors of sedition, but nothing that requires alarm. We do need to discuss the crown's finances and the need for a new plan regarding..." Baelish interjected smoothly. "Your Grace, if I might, the Master of Coin's office has discovered suspicious activity in the port tariffs, messages that suggest potential treasonous collusion." We are investigating thoroughly. Ned frowned at Peter. Treasonous collusion? This was the first he'd heard of that claim. Peter's tone was solemn. Yes, my lord hand. Certain shipments appear to have been exempted from standard tariffs, bound for odd locations. We suspect someone is financing outside elements. Outside elements? Robert echoed blearily. Explain yourself, Peter. Peter placed a sheaf of papers on the table. We believe shipments of weapons and provisions have been moving through the port without due taxes, and the gold used might tie back to someone in the city. We found references to individuals in Essos. He paused, letting tension build. Possibly Targaryen loyalists. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Robert's lip curled. The Targaryens again. By the gods. How many times must I put that family down? He shot Ned a glance. Ned, have you heard anything of this? Ned shook his head. No, your grace. If Peter had concerns, he did not share them with me. He leveled a cool look at Baelish. I would have expected the master of coin to inform the hand promptly if he suspected something so grave. Peter inclined his head. Alas, my lord, the discovery is quite recent. I had to verify the data to avoid undue panic. And I worried we might have a leak. Better to keep it quiet until we were sure. Robert waved a hand impatiently. Well, are you sure? Peter forced a regretful sigh. Sure enough to bring it before you, your grace. But I do not yet have the name of the culprit. I only know that these shipments coincide suspiciously with the times certain lords have visited the docks. Perhaps it's a merchant. Or it might be someone close to the throne, using their influence to hide the transactions. Renly frowned. You said outside elements. You think this is a conspiracy to smuggle arms to the Targaryen girl in Essos? Peter spread his hands. One possibility. Another possibility is that a high lord here is building a private arsenal for a coup. The paper trail is incomplete. He paused, letting his gaze flick to Ned, then quickly away. But we must be vigilant. Even the hand's office might have among its staff someone who... That's enough, Ned said sharply. Peter was dancing on the edge, insinuating that Ned's house might be involved. I will personally oversee an investigation into these suspicious shipments. The City Watch must also coordinate with the Master of Coin's men to identify who is behind them. Cersei's eyes glinted. She saw the opportunity to cast suspicion. Yes, let's see a thorough investigation. Lord Stark, I trust you'll conduct it fairly, if only to prove your own innocence, if that's in question. Her tone was mild, but the barb was clear. The idea that the Starks might be tied to treason. Robert pinched the bridge of his nose, wincing with pain. Gods spare me. We'll have no wild accusations without proof. Ned is my friend. He wouldn't conspire behind my back. He blinked, half-dazed from the painkillers. Just find who's responsible. Then we'll deal with them. Ned bowed. Yes, your grace. His gut twisted with unease. He saw Peter's sly grin. This was a setup, a new piece of the puzzle designed to overshadow the real secrets and paint Ned as suspect. Whether it was forging documents or turning half-truths into a conspiracy, Baelish was manufacturing a swirl of confusion that might land on Ned's doorstep if he wasn't careful. Jaime, quietly observing by the door, kept his expression neutral, but he caught Ned's eye in a brief moment of shared understanding. They both recognized Baelish's hand in this. If Ned was labeled a traitor, it would pave the way for the Lannisters to claim the moral high ground, or so Baelish wanted the realm to believe. Jaime dipped his chin slightly, acknowledging the danger. Ned gave a tight nod. An unspoken promise passed between them. They would not let Peter's cunning destroy them both, if they could help it. The council dragged on with discussion of finances, Robert's injury, and other routine matters. At last, Robert lost patience, demanding to rest. The meeting dissolved. As Ned left, Peter stepped up, offering a gracious bow. My lord hand, perhaps we can work together to root out this corruption in the port. Ned eyed him. Yes, indeed. Let us root it out properly. He forced a polite smile. Please do share every scrap of evidence you've gathered. Peter feigned a hurt look. I'm always transparent with my friends. Let me know when you'd like to review the documents. Then he drifted away, leaving behind the stench of manipulation. That evening, Ned retreated to a secluded courtyard within the Red Keep, where a small lemon tree offered pale fruit and a stone bench faced a trickling fountain. It was quiet there, away from the main bustle. He needed a space to think. The sky was turning purple with dusk, the last rays of daylight glinting off the castle's rooftops. He sat heavily, arms resting on his thighs. Unexpectedly, Jaime Lannister emerged from a colonnade, wearing a simple tunic and breeches rather than his armor. He paused, as though debating whether to interrupt, then approached. "You look about as tired as the king feels," Jaime observed wryly. Ned gestured for him to sit. "I'm not quite sure who's in more peril right now, the king or the realm." Jaime sat, leaving a respectful distance between them. Birds fluttered overhead. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Jaime sighed. "Peter Baelish is building a narrative that you're involved in treasonous dealings, isn't he?" Ned nodded. "Yes, or at least he's making sure the rumor is out there so that if anything happens, I'm the prime suspect. I suspect his forgeries are elaborate. If the City Watch discovers these shipments in connection with my men, it could implicate me in a conspiracy to arm Targaryen loyalists. Robert's present condition, addled by pain and wine, makes him more susceptible to believing such nonsense." Jaime drummed his fingers on his knee, frustration etched on his face. "I had hoped that with Robert back, he could keep some measure of control. But he's hardly in a state to pass clear judgment." Ned glanced around, confirming they were alone. "We don't have much time. If Baelish can produce a shred of false evidence linking me to a plot against the king, it will force Robert's hand. He'll either have to arrest me or let suspicion tear the court apart." Jaime studied Ned's face. "What will you do?" Ned clenched a fist. "Find actual proof that Baelish is the one orchestrating it. Expose him before he can expose me. Or, at the very least, show Robert how the Master of Coin is funneling city funds to create these illusions. But that means we must act fast." Jaime took a moment to reply. The flicker of torchlight danced across his features, revealing resolve. "I can help. I know men in the City Watch who are still loyal to the crown rather than coin. If you need to investigate certain warehouses or question certain merchants discreetly, I can see that you have unimpeded access." Ned eyed him, the old distrust warring with the new understanding. "Why would you risk that? If Baelish succeeds in framing me, your family stands to benefit, at least on the surface." Jaime's mouth set in a grim line. "That's what Baelish wants everyone to think. But letting him orchestrate a false treason charge will only give him more power. He might then use it against my family once you're gone. And besides..." He hesitated. "I'm done seeing innocent people crushed by the realm's intrigues." Ned was silent for a beat, recalling how Jaime had spared Bran in that tower, how that single moment had altered the course of everything. The Kingslayer was indeed a different man than the one Ned had imagined. "All right," Ned said softly. "We'll do it together, but we must move carefully. Baelish is cunning enough to anticipate any direct approach." Jaime nodded, his green eyes reflecting the dying sunlight. "Tell me your plan." Ned laid it out in hushed tones. "A scheme to infiltrate the shipping records at the harbor, to speak to the customs officers, to check which cargo was actually passing through, and to verify which might be part of Baelish's invented conspiracy. If they found discrepancies, fake shipments, non-existent ships, or shipping marks that matched Baelish's private accounts, they could unravel his plot. It wouldn't be easy, given how many of the gold cloaks answered to Baelish's coin, but if Jaime could ensure they weren't hindered, they might have a chance." As Ned spoke, Jaime listened intently. It occurred to Ned how surreal it was to conspire with the man he'd once hated. Yet there they were, two proud men forced into alliance by the cunning manipulations of Peter Baelish. Strange times indeed. When they finished, Ned rose, offering Jaime his hand in a firm clasp. Jaime returned it. For a moment, they were allies in truth, the alliance sealed not by mutual affection, but by necessity and a shared sense that justice, however battered, should prevail. That same night, Tyrion Lannister visited a popular establishment in the city's seedier quarter, a place where whores mingled with merchants, and rumor traveled with the speed of spilled ale. Tyrion kept his hood low, though many recognized the imp by his stature and distinctive features. He found a table in a dim corner, scanning the smoky interior. Over in one corner, a pair of foreign sailors argued in Braavosi accents. Near the center, a minstrel plucked a melancholy tune on a lute. Serving girls with well-practiced smiles dodged groping hands and curses. Eventually, a man wearing a tattered cloak approached Tyrion's table. The man's face was unremarkable, brown beard, scar across one cheek. But Tyrion knew him as Dancy, one of Varys's little birds grown to adulthood. Their relationship was an uneasy partnership of sorts. Dancy did odd jobs for whichever side paid better, and Tyrion happened to have deep pockets. "You got coin," Dancy grunted by way of greeting. Tyrion raised a brow. "I don't buy your other services, dear Dancy. I only seek information. You recall our arrangement?" Dancy smirked. "A few silvers for each rumor I can confirm." He glanced around furtively, then leaned closer. "Heard some big talk on the docks about secret shipments. Men say the master of coin's men came around, hinting that there's a traitor shipping weapons for the Targaryen girl. Could be nonsense, or could be they're laying a trap for someone. Maybe the hand." Tyrion's eyes narrowed. "So the rumors are out in the open. That means Baelish is moving faster than I thought." He slid a few coins across the table. "Anything else?" Dancy hesitated. "The Queen's been meeting with Baelish late at night. People suspect they're planning something big. Some say it's war. Some say it's a purge. Hard to get details. But I know a gold cloak, a friend of a friend, who says they're forging documents and paying off a handful of merchants to swear they sold cargo to the Stark household." Tyrion's hand tightened on the mug he was holding. "And these merchants will claim they were asked to procure arms for some overseas buyer allied with the Targaryens, linking it back to Ned Stark, presumably?" Dancy nodded, taking a sip of ale. "That's the story. If it sticks, the king might behead Stark for treason." Tyrion sighed, pushing another coin forward. "Then I'll need the names of these merchants, or the gold cloak who's facilitating it." "That'll cost more," Dancy said, eyes gleaming. Tyrion rolled his eyes and handed over an extra silver stag. "Talk, you weasel." Dancy rattled off a couple of names. Small-time dock merchants easily bribed. "And the gold cloak to watch out for is one Sergeant Byron. Low rank, but he's in Baelish's pocket. He organizes shady deals near the quays." Tyrion tucked the information away. He finished his ale in silence, left a few coins on the table, and rose. Dancy vanished into the smoky crowd. Tyrion left the establishment feeling the weight of an impending confrontation. He couldn't simply let Baelish discredit Ned Stark. That would cause a ripple effect leading to chaos and possibly the downfall of the Lannisters themselves. Jaime and Ned needed time to prove Baelish's duplicity, and Tyrion might just ensure they had it. Across the city in her private rooms, Cersei impatiently paced, waiting for word on Baelish's progress. She fingered the edges of a forged letter that Baelish had left for her to see. It described shipments of finely wrought swords destined for Pentos but supposedly paid for by agents of House Stark. If placed in the right hands, especially Robert's, once he was less addled by painkillers, it could set Ned Stark's world aflame. But doubt gnawed at Cersei. Could Baelish be using her just as much as he was using Ned? What if he intended to blackmail her next? She trusted no one, not truly. Not her father, not Jaime, not even her own cunning. But the alternative was to stand by and wait for Ned to reveal the truth of Joffrey's parentage. That was unthinkable. No, she would push forward with Baelish's plan. If Ned was removed, no one could threaten her children's place on the throne. She stared at a flickering candle, her reflection dancing in the polished metal holder. Her father had demanded results. If Ned was eliminated as a threat, Tywin might be satisfied, and House Lannister's position secured. Even Jaime would have to see that it was necessary. Perhaps then the family could focus on the real threat, ensuring Joffrey's eventual coronation. She blew out the candle, plunging the room into darkness, and whispered a silent vow that she would let nothing, and no one, destroy her children's claim. High above the labyrinth of corridors, the Red Keep's highest windows glowed faintly under the moon. In a small turret room, Varys the Spider observed the shadows with practiced eyes. He had gleaned that Baelish was forging a treason plot, that Ned Stark and Jaime Lannister were forging a fragile cooperation, and that the Queen was nearing desperation. He also knew Tyrion was gathering threads. Varys's own network of whisperers reported daily on the swirl of tensions. War was a hair's breadth away if someone made a single misstep. Varys sighed, stepping away from the window. He wished to preserve peace, or at least some semblance of it. A full-scale conflict would tear the realm and allow foreign powers, perhaps even the Targaryen girl in the east, to exploit their weakness. Yet how to prevent it when each side scrambled for advantage? He would have to be nimble, sowing tiny seeds of calm, or redirecting certain information to keep the realm from erupting. That was his role, the secret caretaker in the shadows. He glided over to a writing desk, quill in hand. He would send a note or two, carefully phrased, to nudge certain individuals, Tyrion perhaps, so that Baelish's forgeries didn't go unchallenged too long. A subtle hint that the Master of Coin's new evidence was suspect might be enough to buy Ned Stark time to muster a defense. Varys's lips curved in a faint smile. The game was delicate, and the spider thrived on delicate webs. Thus, the stage was set. In the days that followed, Ned and Jaime quietly coordinated an investigation into Baelish's dockside dealings, while Baelish fanned rumors of Stark treachery, forging documents, and bribing merchants to swear that they had seen Stark's envoys ordering suspicious cargo. Cersei waited for Baelish's final unveiling of these proofs. Robert struggled with his injury, growing crankier and more gullible by the day. Tyrion attempted to subvert Baelish's scheme from the inside, dropping cautionary hints to the king's men that not all was as it seemed. Varys nudged certain informants to keep the conflict from boiling over too soon. Every faction braced for an inevitable showdown, and while the realm's eyes remained mostly blind to the deeper currents, those at the heart of power felt the pounding tide drawing closer. A single day or night might bring revelations or bloodshed, and perhaps both. Ned Stark and Jaime Lannister, perched on this knife's edge of unexpected friendship, knew they had little margin for error. If they failed, King's Landing would drown in lies and war. If they succeeded, they might just expose Peter Baelish's machinations and avert catastrophe, or at least postpone it long enough to address the other, even darker secrets that threatened the realm. None could foresee precisely how events would unfold, only that the clash of cunning, pride, and fear was imminent. In a land where deception so often triumphed, two men who should have been enemies were pinning their hopes on each other's flawed but genuine decency. It was an unlikely alliance, but perhaps the only chance the Seven Kingdoms had to sidestep a greater doom. And so, beneath the hot southern sun and the drifting ashes of 1,000 old feuds, the final pieces inched toward confrontation, while the realm itself seemed to hold its breath, awaiting the next move.